Obi-Wan Kenobi would be a buffer character between Luke and the Force. Now, the Force as a system is not the villain. It's not the thing he needs to overcome, but he needs to learn how to use the Force in order to beat the Galactic Empire. And therefore, he is a representative of that system. Across galaxies and imaginative realms, stories carry us beyond the ordinary. This is Reading Things and Writing Stuff, where we explore the craft of sci-fi and fantasy stories and uncover how legendary tales are built so you can forge your own. I'm Tim Fasciola, award-winning author of the Vengeful Realm series, here to guide you through the art of storytelling. Welcome back to Reading Things and Writing Stuff. I'm Tim Fasciola, author coach and author of A Vengeful Realm. You know what I love? I love big secondary casts that matter. That's an important qualifier. They need to matter. They need to serve the story. But when a story can incorporate a large secondary cast that's meaningful and memorable, I freaking love it. So I want to talk about a couple different stories that are like similar enough in genre and, things that do secondary casts well, things that like might not do secondary casts so well. But first, let's talk about what is a secondary cast? What am I talking about? And when we're writing, how do we break that down so to ensure that all the role functions are met? So secondary cast and role functions. So what I mean by this is I'm not just talking about protagonist, ally, antagonist, ally. I'm not just talking about, there's a mentor, right? Like I want to get a little deeper than that. I have mentioned like an oppositional character or diversion character. Like these generally tend to be part of that secondary cast. But let's go through what each of them is and where they sit on this axis of antagonism. So let's start on the protagonist side of things because there's usually less. And you don't need to have all of them. Not every story should have all of them. Some can, but it's a means of making sure that they serve the story. So if you have like a party system, right, where the character and their allies are on adventure. So whether it is Ashes of the Sun, where there's very clearly like, okay, this is the protagonist and this is their logical ally and this is their emotional ally and this is their support character. So like it allows for differentiation. So they are the logical ally. They serve the protagonist in a means of like they express and explain things in a logical way, and that's the lens through which they view the world. And that's very different from the emotional ally, who is more feeling and intuitive and allows for the character to often like the protagonist to have more of an emotional connection with and bounce those types of feelings off of, whereas the logical ally, they might be bouncing more like plotting, planning, scheming type of like, what's next type of decisions. And they both can disagree with and challenge the protagonist. Like they can also serve as the opposition role in part. But then there's the support ally. And the support ally is like the Samwise Gamgee. Like they are the ride or die friend, where even when they disagree, they're still like along for the ride. And this is like a very different stories fulfill these in different ways. Like maybe you've heard of the 5-man band, where you have, your protagonist, and then you have your Lancer character, who I call the opposition character, who's kind of like the foil or the one who's challenging the protagonist worldview and almost sharpening them to be better prepared for, more intentional or otherwise. Like they just kind of butt heads often about certain things, but it allows for the protagonist to be better prepared for the main antagonists. So there's the Lancer, there's the muscle, there's the heart, there's the brains. And this kind of diversifies the cast. So you don't have people that just kind of like, there's a whole group and they walked. Like they should engage and interact with the protagonist differently to develop. Now, if they become too one-dimensional, like they only do this thing, well, then they don't feel real. Like, remember, your characters should feel like people that existed before your book and will exist after your book, unless you kill them off. Not that I've ever done that. Maybe. But if you want to kill, if you're going to kill off a character, they need to matter to the reader. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, well, that guy's gone. I guess like you didn't have enough plot armor for them. And that's not fulfilling. That doesn't fulfill. It doesn't serve. It doesn't create catharsis. So if we want our secondary characters to matter and hold meaning and be memorable, they should do something, and they should create and foster this dynamic, this interpersonal relationship with the protagonist. So five-man band is one way. Emotional, logical, and support character is another way to just like diversify the roles on the protagonist side of things. So then in the middle, right in the, like we could do the same thing with the antagonistic system. Once again, you can have different systems, different overarching umbrellas, and they can each have like a diversion character that represents. So like oftentimes I think of like Star Wars: A New Hope. We often think of, well, Darth Vader is the antagonist. It's like, well, not really. Darth Vader is under Grand Moff Tarkin in A New Hope, and Grand Moff Tarkin is underneath Palpatine. So like we see Darth Vader because he's the one making all the noise. That's what diversion characters do. They divert from and represent the big bad. So it's important to understand, oh, okay, I need more than just the antagonist. Maybe it depends on the story. And then we have down in the middle, right? In the middle, we have what I call a buffer character. Now, a buffer character is usually part of the antagonistic system in some capacity. Now, they don't necessarily need to be part of the primary system. They could be a subsystem. So, for example, like Obi-Wan Kenobi would be a buffer character between Luke and the Force. Now, the Force as a system is not the villain. It's not the thing he needs to overcome, but he needs to learn how to use the Force in order to beat the Galactic Empire. And therefore, he is a representative of that system that is part of that system. He is a Jedi, but he, like a buffer character, ideologically or emotionally aligns to the protagonist in some capacity. And there's different types of these buffer characters. There's benevolent buffers. There are reluctant buffers. There are unempowered buffers, and there's unreliable buffers. So different ones for different reasons. So like if you think about like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, like Gollum very much is an unreliable buffer. He knows Mordor. It's part of the system in that way. He knows how to get to Mordor. But do you trust him to get you there? And that's something that creates conflict. So if you've ever read it, An Ember in the Ashes. An Ember in the Ashes is like, it's a young adult series, 4-book series, but it has like such a good buffer character in Cook. And that is like a reluctant buffer. She doesn't want to help, but she helps because she's emotionally aligned with the protagonist. I'm not going to go into that. If you do read that, it's like a big reveal. It's kind of like, oh, it's so good. I don't want to spoil that. Even though like I'm going to spoil a lot of stuff here. I've already spoiled a lot of stuff here, but that one, I'll leave that one. The benevolent buffer, Dumbledore is a good example of a benevolent buffer. He is part of the system. So if we look at book 1, the Sorcerer's Stone, the Philosopher's Stone, depending on if you're across the pond, but in the Sorcerer's Stone, it's pretty much like it's Harry versus Snape, Harry versus Dumbledore, sure, but it's really Harry's breaking the school's rules. That's like where a lot of the conflict comes from. He keeps breaking the school's rules and keeps getting in trouble with the school. So Dumbledore represents the school. He's the headmaster of the school. So the late emerging antagonistic system is actually, Voldemort via Quirrell. And so Dumbledore and buffer characters in general, they cannot help the protagonist do the thing. They cannot help them achieve their story question. They cannot help them accomplish or answer, and answer the story question. But they want them to. They want like what's best for the character, the protagonist. They just aren't empowered to do something about it. Fitchner in Red Rising, he's part of the Proctor system. He's part of the Gold system. He wants Darrow to succeed. So he can't do anything to make that happen, but he wants it to happen. So he's unempowered to do anything about it. So different buffer characters can be like fan favorites if they're done well. The king of buffer characters is Uncle Iroh in Avatar: The Last Airbender. If anyone has watched that show, like that, like Iroh is a favorite because he kind of serves as the buffer for between everyone. He makes things make sense. So it's like oftentimes it's like, oh, they're the mentor. It's like they can be the mentor, but they often fulfill a much more important role than just that. And usually they can be part of the antagonistic system in some capacity as well. Once again, it doesn't need to be the main system. Using Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is not part of the Sith. He's not part of the Galactic Empire. He is part of the Force. Luke must master the Force in order to defeat the Galactic Empire. So it can be a little nuanced in that regard. So let's get into some of the examples of memorable secondary casts, not so memorable secondary casts. And we'll look at different subgenres with it. So in the realm of sci-fi, epic sci-fi, like if you look at the secondary cast in Red Rising and those role functions and compare that to the secondary cast in Sun Eater, the Empire of Silence, Christopher Rocchio, very different. Like they get compared all the time and I hate it. I hate it. And the reason why I hate it is because like they're so different in narrative tone, so different in structure, the plotting, the pacing, like they don't really have anything in common other than that they're both in space. But for me, the real separation is in if we're just comparing book one and book one, but you can also do this across the series. But the secondary cast in Red Rising is fantastic. Whereas it almost doesn't exist in Sun Eater. Like characters kind of come in and come out because it's Hadrian and Marlowe's story. And that's it. Everyone else is kind of like in and out, come and go, or don't, or, you know, we see it and we never see it again. Whereas secondary cast in Red Rising is constantly coming back, whether it's Severo and Cassius, whether it is, you know, even Roke or in Mustang, like the secondary cast matures on both sides of the axis of antagonism. Apollonius, like a Tactus, like there's so many characters that you're just like, that are memorable, that you care about, that you love, and that you love to hate. And we get into the second era of Red Rising, like there's even more characters that are even more fleshed out. You don't get that in Sun Eater. Now, does Sun Eater need that? No, I mean, it's a great series that people love, but you have to identify which one is the story I'm trying to tell and does it serve the story I'm trying to tell. Next, I love the secondary cast in the Licanius Trilogy. The Shadow of What Was Lost is book one. It's here somewhere, this one. So The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington, his first trilogy, like the secondary cast is phenomenal. All of those characters matter to the, like they matter to the story. They feel integral to the plot and we care about so significantly. It's not just Davian's story. And if we compare that to like John Gwynn's The Bloodborne Saga, Orca, and the others, like, you know what I mean? Like they're not as memorable. Their stories are, they're, and does that matter? Not necessarily. Bloodsworn Saga is fantastic. People love it. So I don't want you to think like, oh, I need to have 12 characters and I need to fulfill all of these different cast and role functions. No. But just understand that different stories have different things and they serve the story in different ways. And making sure that if you are going to have them, they matter. And if you're not going to have them, make sure that there's conflict. And then we still need these things that occur to drive the story forward and showcase its themes and bring us to a cathartic conclusion. The secondary cast, like if we're looking at Dark Academia, the secondary cast in The Will of the Many versus the secondary cast in the Nevernight Chronicles by Jay Kristoff. Like the secondary cast in The Will of the Many is excellent. The slow drip, the slow feed of the more we learn about each character, it matters. Like they feel like there's this found family element that really resonates. Whereas in Nevernight, when like a character death occurred, I was just like, all right. Well. And then that character came out. I was like, I still don't care. And like, that's fine. Like I still enjoyed the series, but I didn't enjoy it because of the secondary cast. I enjoyed it because it's a revenge story. It has a gladiator component. So like I loved it for its ornaments more so than I loved it because of its narrative structure. I did love the way the story was told in terms of the use of the narrator until I realized who the narrator was. And I didn't love that. That's besides the point. You're missing the point. Don't go reel it back in, get back on topic. The secondary cast didn't add. Didn't necessarily subtract, but it didn't add. Ashes of the Sun, same thing. It adds because I didn't find the protagonists to be that strong, but the secondary cast actually helped flesh out that protagonist and cover up some of their warts. So there's different elements like that that can serve the story really well. It just depends. And you have to know your story and the audience you're trying to reach. And the same is true in Sebastian J. Castell's Greycoat series. Like the secondary cast in this is small. Don't get me wrong. It's not a huge secondary cast. But if we compare this to The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, very similar in genre in that there's like traveling judges essentially. This one is one of my favorites. And Justice of Kings fell flat for me because the central viewpoint character, that was a big issue for me. And the secondary cast was less engaging. Whereas the secondary cast in this, like Kest and Brasti, I freaking loved. And then every character that gets added along the way, whether it's Valiana or Daria, or like there's just like characters that they start to take on, or the Taylor, like they take on a role, they feel like they find a place in your heart and they stick with you and they make the journey more memorable, as opposed to just like filling space, taking air. Can you have a successful story that enters readers' meaning-making cycles without a big secondary cast? Absolutely you can. Don't like, I'll use Finding Nemo again, right? It's a story about a father trying to find his son, a father overcoming fear to find his son. That is what the story is about. Does it need a big secondary cast? There's the couple people he meets along the way. You know, there's Dory. There's the fish that Nemo's in the tank with. There's Bruce, who reminds us that fish are friends, not food, until he smells blood, and then it's all bets are off. But like they're tertiary. They come and they go. They're not really. It's a very small cast, which is really solid for a story geared for children. It's very focused. It's very tight. There's not a lot of other things going on. There's not a lot of new ideas being presented. So it depends on your audience. It depends on the heart of the story you're trying to tell and the genre conventions that you're working within. And I've mentioned the relativity of role functions. So within A Vengeful Realm, there are 7 protagonists. And, you know, we have Zephyrus, and, you know, Layden is his ally against the Revivalists, but Layden is an adversary in the fact that he is part of the kingdom. Nalia is, you know, he literally owns him. She's a slave owner. She's part of the system he wants to bring down. And yet there's a chemistry. There is a help between them. She's almost a buffer character to that system in many ways. And how characters change and move along the axis of antagonism makes it more dynamic. Then there's Phoenix, another gladiator within Zephyrus's Ludus. They are almost like they're rivals to one another in some respects. But from Zephyrus's perspective, their relationship is very different than Phoenix to Zephyrus. How Phoenix views Zephyrus is different than how Zephyrus views Phoenix. How Zephyrus views Nalia is very different than how Nalia views Zephyrus. Nalia's relationship with Layden is very different than Layden's relationship with Zephyrus. Their role functions are different relative to the perspective we're viewing the world through. And having that web interconnected and having a deep understanding of role functions and what characters do to serve the story in each relationship they represent can go a long way to making characters feel fleshed out and meaningful to the story, meaningful to the narrative, meaningful to the themes that you're trying to discuss. All of that can come together really profoundly if you begin with the end in mind. So taking the time to understand characters, secondary casts, role functions, not letting the necessarily, like, you don't want to give your secondary characters your hero moments. That's just going to steal from your protagonists. That's no good. Understand, what does this character do? How do they serve the story? If they're going to if they're stealing a hero moment and it feels right, maybe they need to be your protagonist. Maybe your protagonist is a central viewpoint character for another character's story. If that's the case, we need to make big sweeping changes to this. And you want to, we're in the next section, we're going to be talking about plotting and like the reason why I love plotting so much is you can, what I call fast draft. I can do a bunch of story outlines and kind of see like which one resonates the best much faster than I can write a whole novel and figure it out. So as it relates to the timing and the efficiency, and some people like, I like to discovery write. I like to figure it out along the way. And that's great. Just don't call it efficient. I am a big believer that everyone is a plotter. They just haven't figured out how yet. It's just a matter of what degree of outlining and plotting you need. And we'll talk about that in the next section. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in to Reading Things and Writing Stuff. I'm Tim Fasciola. Please hit me up with all of the books that you've read where you've loved the secondary cast, or stories where the secondary cast kind of fell flat for you. Let me know your thoughts. And as always, I'll see you when we turn the page.